Hi. Today I took the panel off of my DIY drum machine to make some modifications, and I thought it was a good opportunity to show you what's under the hood. I will go into a lot of detail about what it is, but for anyone who's interested in electronics and want to see how stuff works, or if you haven't seen what's underneath things like this before, I thought it would be interesting for you to take a look. So this is an Arduino Nano. This is the Robertsonics wave trigger. I bought this board complete from SparkFun. I bought the Nano, obviously, from Arduino, but then I downloaded the Nano Sketch from Look Mum No Computer, who programmed it to be a sequencer. So the sequencer on this half controls the Robertsonics wave trigger, in which there is a SD card filled with sounds. So the sequencer sequences the sounds according to how you patch them up. So there's a row of sockets here. Number 1 is attached to number 1 pin. So when you activate number 1 pin, and number 1 is attached to, let's say, this socket, then it'll play the sound that's connected to that socket.
I just wanted to zoom in on an Arduino device itself with all the tangled of wires getting in the way to explain what I mean by pins. So do you see these little nubbins here? These are actually pins themselves sticking through the body of the board, extending out on the other side. And they're connected, if you see in reflection here, through little traces to this little black square here. This is the brains of the Arduino. It's the microcontroller itself. So we programmed this microcontroller to respond to the signals coming through the wires to the pins, and we use this USB port to interface with our computers, which has an application from Arduino on it. Arduino code uses C programming language to instruct this microcontroller to do various things. I'll go into that a little bit more later, but right now I just wanted to show you what's on the underside of this strip board. Basically, you just take a wire and you stick it through a hole and you solder it down. Right here you see these little strips of copper. They're separated so that any charge that's introduced through the wire will follow that line only. So when we place our Arduino into the strip board, we cut little gaps between the pins because we don't want a charge to travel to both pins at the same time. We just want it to hit one. But after that, you just download your sketch and you're off. The usefulness of a device like this is that it takes an otherwise fairly complex task like sequencing and puts it within the grasp of a hobbyist like myself.
The modifications that I made, one of them is visible. It's that I attached this little switch here. It's a 3-way switch to this trigger jack socket. And I've attached 2 different points to this switch so that one of them goes to the bank channel, I guess you can call it a channel, and the other one goes to the fill channel. But when I turn this over, I'll show you how it's no longer the fill channel. I've changed it, but that's on the inside. The outside is that I put a switch in and I stuck it right there where the LED used to be. Boink. So, over the other side. Right, now you see that I've set up a really simple pattern where Each one of these triggers activates one after the other. That's a sequence. And this button, which used to be called the fill button, I've reprogrammed to be the flip button. That way I didn't have to change the initial. What that means is that it flips the sequence. So instead of going this one first and then down, it'll go that one first and then up. So there's that, and then there we go. So that was just something I wanted. I wanted to be able to reverse my sequence for just for some variety. After that, I realized what I actually wanted was to be able to automate it so that I didn't have to push the button. I could be twiddling these knobs over here, and this would automatically go off or reverse itself in a pre-programmed manner. So the way I achieved that was to use this trigger jack socket, which actually wasn't specified in the plans. It was in the plans, but it wasn't in the video, and it was never addressed what exactly it was. But I guessed that it was a previous plan that Lookman on the computer wanted to use to do this, just to automate. I think he said something about doing a reset with a jack. So I think that's what the plan was, so that's what I did. I have that plugged into maths, and it's on a very slow pattern, so that when you see that light go on, that's when it'll send a signal through this jack and to the flip button when I have the switch flipped up, and to the bank button when I've had the switch flipped down. That way the bank is also, it's a rudimentary memory so that you could program another sequence in and have that. So really I have 4 different sequences I can be playing with automatically while I'm noodling around with my other knobs. So when you see this light go on, this sequence will reverse. There you go. Neat, huh? And just to show the effect of the bank button, when I switch banks, there's only 2. It's per channel, so if I'm on this channel right here, I can clear it and then program a different switch or a different signal. That's obvious enough. But when I want to go back to the original pattern, just push bank again, and it'll go back to its original. So then, if I press the switch down, the next time this light goes on, it'll revert back to the old one. And I have to say, Arduino is a little finicky about the signals it receives. I found that to be true on every Arduino I've programmed. Right now it's receiving, if you see, I don't know if you can see that. Right there, that's the clock from maths that it's receiving, and it's very rapid. And sometimes it doesn't catch all of the signals that that it is being given, and so that actually kind of mangles up the sound too. But I guess that just is what you have to deal with DIY stuff. Let's see if I can just play with this a little bit for fun, and I'll record it too.
On the screen, you see two versions of the sketch of the big button sequencer. On the right is Look Mom No Computers version, and on the left is my modification. This is going to be a short little section here. I just wanted to highlight something really interesting I found as I was learning about how sketches work and how you can manipulate them to make them do what you want. And I did this merely by, well, there's two ways I did this. One is by just opening up the sketch and messing with it to see what happens when I change variables. And the other way was by going to Do Space, which is a community maker space here in Omaha, where they have a mentor program. Basically, if you have a problem with something like Arduino, then you can go online and click a button and make an appointment with someone who knows about Arduino, and they will sit down with you for an hour and kind of hash out what it is you're trying to figure out. So when I looked at this section specifically, I could tell that it was, well, actually I looked at this one because that's his version. I could tell that it had something to do with the sequence because it said sequence. And there were 14 rows with 32 or 43 actually zeros in them. I worked out pretty clearly that the 14 rows were the voices that that you can choose from, and there are two banks of them. So that was pretty clear. 43 I didn't know, but I thought, well, 43 contains 32, so maybe this is the step numbers, and then there's 11 other variables. And what I wanted was to reverse the sequence. So I went on to the Arduino website and looked up ways to reverse sequences. They didn't quite work out, so that's why I reached out for help. And what I learned was this is indeed an array that maps out the sequence. The zeros are when there's no signal going to a port, and if there's a 1, if I had programmed a 1 in there, then there would always be a signal going out to that first voice on the second step. And what happens in this program is that we can control this from the panel itself. So I don't have to go in and change this sequence in the code. I can just push a button and it'll respond. And if there happens to be, if I have pushed buttons on that panel, I'm just doing this randomly, that look like this to the computer, it runs through this loop many times a second and sees that it needs to send a signal out here, here, and here. And if I happen to change it, if I delete that step, the next time it runs through the loop, it sees that there's a 0 there and doesn't send a signal out. So that was really interesting. It's so simplistic. I thought that it was going to be a lot more complex to program something like this. So what we did was we included another variable, which was the flipped sequence. And that's the second part I wanted to highlight, because that's the genius that I could never figure out, but I learned from. Here's the section that describes what happens for the computer's sake when you flip the sequence. And I mean, it looks like a bunch of nonsense words to me, but when I take it line by line, for instance, this line, and then I go on to the Arduino website, which has a glossary, and I see the plus plus. That is exactly, come here, buddy. There we go. That's exactly right there. That's plus plus. So this is a compound operator which increments the value of a variable by 1, which is exactly what a sequence is. It's taking the quantity that it had before and incrementing it by 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So then, when you look at this whole line, you see also it's here again. This is the whole line 4, and then this first part is the initialization, and that's defining what the variable is. And then the next part is the condition if this variable is less than the sequence length, which was defined a little earlier, and then the increment. So it's logical. You just have to learn the language, basically. And I'm on my way. Something that we discussed when we were doing these changes was this array up here could be any number of rows long. I could make an array any multiple of 7, and that's only limited by the number of ports I have. If I had 8 ports, then I could make it any quantity multiple of 8, so that I could have multiple banks and I could run like a chain of sequences from one to the other, and that could be another variable I could program in. And that's something I'm going to work on. Not for this one, because this one doesn't have a screen, and that's the major part of having so many banks, is you'd lose track of it if you didn't have some little counter that'll tell you which bank you're on. But I would urge you, if you're in any way interested in learning to code in Arduino, which you probably are if you're this far into the video, just open up your sketches and mess around with them. Save one that is the original, and then put a little underscore there and write some kind of phrase that describes what version you're working on, and save that in a sort of a timed folder for yourself, so you know I made this on this date and this is the version. That's the best way to keep track of them. And then just mess around with them, and if it doesn't work, then you go back to your original and try something else. So that's what I wanted to share with you.
I'd like to thank Nick for helping me figure this out, and I'd like to thank you for watching this video. I hope you pulled something interesting out of it. There's going to be a couple links here on the last few seconds of the video if you want to see this in action, and you can watch future videos to see how I use it in the future.